Thanks for joining us today on a special episode of the Jesus Famous podcast with Pastor Nate Holdridge. Today we have a special guest in the studio sharing their story about how Jesus has changed their life. Join us as we discuss stories and discover how Jesus is famous and the testimonies of those around us.
Nate, super good to see you.
You really feel that way?
Always, bro.
Okay, all right, good.
Always.
I didn't know.
It's so good to see you. And hey, I'm really thankful for this article that you wrote. I don't know if it's weird to start this off on like a serious note or not, but dude, this article meant a lot to me because I've been doing ministry now with you for, I think like 14 years, maybe 15 years.
Yeah.
A long time, like almost half of my life. And there have been parts of my life where, you know, everybody who's going through their 20s in ministry, you're kind of just wondering, is this really like the thing for me? And there's a lot of difficulties as you're learning leadership and discipling people and teaching the whole thing. And I was just reading this article. I'm like, dude, I've seen Nate do all these things. And I feel like I've begun to put some of these things into practice in my life and seen the benefit of them. And there was just something to it. I was like, there is like a lifestyle for ministry where you got to kind of be in shape for it. And I feel like this article kind of talks about that. People talk about, you know, going to fighting camp or baseball camp or whatever. And I was like, this is ministry camp right here. These are the things, the practices that you got to kind of put into place to really run the race well, like Paul talks about, you know. And I've seen you do it, and it's been cool to see how you've been stoked about ministry. I know there's always hard stuff going on, but you love the people, you love the word, you love Jesus. And my favorite thing, dude, is that your wife loves you and your kids love you. And I'm always like, okay, if that stuff's happening, then something good is happening in this guy's life. So I just want to say thanks for explaining this and kind of pouring out of your life these different practices and principles. It's really helpful. So
yeah, man, it was an honor to like think about it and write it. I mean, as you know, it kind of came out of just one of our staff meetings, and it was a meeting that I was leading, and I just thought, I think I want to talk to our team about these, and 20 is such an arbitrary number, but 20 practices that I think have helped me serve Jesus in one place. But I think these are probably, you can apply these if you're called to move around quite a bit, but just to keep serving Jesus, whether it's in one place or in various places, for a long time. Yeah. And, you know, I'm only 43 years old at this point, so it's hard for me to really put my flag in the ground for a long time. But you said about your life, you're saying, this is my whole ministry life so far. Yeah. I've been in one place. It feels like a long time to you. Totally. You know, when you're 70 years old, these 14 or 15 years won't have felt like a really long time. That will have felt like a really long time. But what we're talking about is endurance, and like, what are some good practices to have in your life to be able to do this for a long time? And I'm really proud of you, man. It's so fun to serve Jesus with you. You know, you were a part of my youth group back in the day, and to see you, press into the Lord and serving here in what is, if this is not your home church, then it's nobody's home church. You know, I mean, man. You grew up here. And to serve the Lord in this place, I mean, it's a pretty neat thing. So I'm glad that it blessed you. That blesses me.
It really did. And thanks for reminding me about where this article came from. I was reading it, and I was like, man, I've heard him talk about these things before, but I can't place where you talked about them. But it's from a staff chapel. Yeah. I was curious if this article came from any other kind of place in your life. And what I mean is, you know, I've read some different books and heard articles and people speak about this kind of stuff, but it's come from a place of pain. Where, you know, like a pastor's gone through some hardship, they've learned a lot, and now they're writing or speaking about it to help the next generation. And I was curious from you if that was kind of your experience, or if you just kind of reflected on your life and just saw that there were some great practices to share. But I don't know how much you want to get into that, but did this come from a place of hurt at all? Or
gosh, like, I wouldn't say a specific pain, you know, and just trying to be honest and transparent about it. You know, I wouldn't say, there was this one particular episode that made me feel like I needed to write this article. I think some of it for me is just, ministry can be painful.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want to get out my violin and, make it sound like we have the hardest life ever or anything like that. It's a joy to serve Jesus. I agree with Paul, the apostle. He said, I thank my God who counted me faithful and put me into the ministry. Like, this guy was beaten and shipwrecked and stoned and imprisoned, all kinds. And he's at the end of his life saying, I'm really thankful that I got to live this life. There is something special about it. And so, I'm not one of those guys that thinks, woe is me, it's so hard or anything like that. But it is challenging. And the church work, gospel work, you're up against opposition on the outside. You're up against inevitable opposition on even the inside of the church. And you're up against opposition with your own dang self.
So
just
true.
The limitations that you feel, the temptations that you go through, the lack of will and drive and desire or giftedness or knowledge or ability. I mean, these are complexing times that we're living in. So it'd be real easy to kind of tap out, throw in the towel, and just say, I can't do this anymore. So I think for me, I probably wrote this out of a general pain. But then I think also I wrote it out of a desire. I put this list together because I was thinking about younger people that I'm serving with right now, and knowing that I'd really like to see them endure. I'd really like to see them keep going. So what are some of the things that I think have been helpful to help me keep going? I'm not representative of everybody, but these at least have been helpful to me. And if there's 2 or 3 that help someone else find their rhythm and keep going in serving Jesus, then it was worth it for me to put this together.
Totally. And as I was reading it, it's helpful for pastors for sure, ministry leaders. But a lot of the things that you're talking about here don't require ordination. They don't require a Bible degree. They don't require some kind of status or anything like that. If you got time and a local church body, you can kind of do all of this stuff, which made it for me think, man, it's really accessible, to a pastor, but also to somebody who's just learning how to follow Jesus for the first time. There's a lot of principles in here that are just kind of lifestyle practices. And so I was thinking about the person who's listening to this and thinking, man, if you're not in a leadership capacity in the church where you feel like, you're overseeing ministries and teams and stuff like that, but maybe you're a student, you got a dorm room, maybe you're a parent, you have kids, spouse, you have a spouse, or just some friends, this kind of stuff you can put into practice right now and do ministry for the long haul. We're not just talking about pastors and leaders, although this does apply really specifically to leadership, but this is for Christians, man, to live a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, that's why I called the article 20 Practices That Will Help You Serve Jesus for a long time.
Serve Jesus.
Who is there that's a Christian that isn't called to serve Jesus? We're all called to the ministry life. So it doesn't have to be, official. It's my job. I'm ordained. I went to seminary, all that kind of stuff. It could just be, I want to serve Jesus with my life. I'm a youth leader and I'm helping out, each week, and I've got my little small group and I'm trying to pour into these people that are younger than me. How can I set up good rhythms to help me get that job done? So yeah, man, great observation.
That's so cool. I want to pick your brain about a few of these things. There's 20 things.
You don't want to go through all 20?
I was like, can we write a book about this, or can we do a bunch of episodes? But I'd love to pick your brain about a few things, and I'm just going to direct everybody to this article on nateholdridge.com. I encourage you to read through each point, but each point even is kind of like a teaser into that particular practice or that thing that you can really throw yourself into. But I did have a few I wanted to ask you about that you probably get asked about all the time. But the first one you wrote down was reading.
Yeah.
And I know that, we've talked about before, leaders are readers, readers are leaders, and reading is just a big part of growth, But a lot of people just have a hard time figuring out what to read, when to read, and how much can you really expect yourself to read. Some people are just natural readers. I don't know if you are or not, but just consume books. Mm-hmm. I empathize with the person who reads one book a year, but I'm just curious from you, what is, because you mentioned how important it is for you and how Paul wanted his books, kind of towards the end of his life. That was a big part of his refreshment. So I was curious from you, like, what is your reading habit like? Would you call it a habit? Like, how do you build it into your life?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a habit, and it is something you have to build into your life.
Okay.
It doesn't happen naturally, or at least not for me. It's not a natural kind of thing. It's something I have to really fight for. As you were getting ready, kind of winding up this question, I had a memory of an embarrassing thing that I said one time when I was younger. I remember talking with a friend of mine who was a pretty avid reader for that stage of life. We were both in our, early 20s or something like that. And I was just in this phase where I was in this like Bible only phase. As far as my reading
purist
went. And he was talking about the latest book that he was reading that was, I forget what it was about, but it was definitely rooted in scripture. Mm-hmm. And I just made some kind of comment, about like, oh, I don't know, man, I'm just into like reading the Bible only, right now. And maybe that was something I needed to go through at that time of my life. But I just kind of had this attitude like, why read?
Totally.
The reality is, God has given to the church gifted teachers and leaders, and reading is such a great practice to get into. They can really give you, books can give you so much life and perspective, experience that you don't have to get the hard way. It can give you an understanding of Scripture. Absolutely. I mean, where would we be in our understanding of God's Word if it weren't for gifted authors and scholars and pastors and teachers, writing out their thoughts and their studies, breaking down original languages and things like that. I mean, reading is really important. So for me, it's a habit that I've developed over time. I do have an article that I wrote, I think last year, the year before somewhere. You could search for it at nateholdridge.com, or you could put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes for sure.
How I read as many books as I do.
Heck yeah.
And, I do read a fair amount, each year. And for me, it's all about planning. It's all about planning.
Yeah.
So I know some people aren't like this, and some people hear the word planning and they just get, like an allergic reaction to it, But if you could just bear with me for a second, what I mean by planning is knowing what you're going to read next.
Yes.
After you finish the book you're reading now, what are you going to read next?
Cue it up.
If you don't know the answer to that question, you're never going to really establish a good rhythm for reading, because then each book that you finish, you go on the inevitable nebulous quest to find the next book that you're going to read. And it's in that gap, at least for me, that I find the momentum stops. So I keep a running list of what I'm going to read next. Now, if you want to plan further than that, I do plan further than that. So for me, I always have 3 books that I'm reading at any given time. I always have something that's fun. So it might be fiction. Right now I'm reading The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, wow.
So I'll be doing that for a while. And then I always have a secondary book that I'm unwilling to listen to. I'm unwilling to have it read to me, whether it's Audible or, the Alexa app, reading it out loud to me or whatever. I'm reading it with my own eyes. Usually this is something that's meatier, more for me, more theological, more difficult. And then a third book that I'll read or listen to. So I use Kindle books. I read those. And so I've just discovered that the Alexa app is awesome. I can just tell it to read me my book, and it will just pick up wherever I left off and just keep that book rolling. So I always have those 3 books going, and the one that I'm reading with my, sitting down looking at, and the one that I'm listening to, those are always, edifying, challenging, whether it's scriptural or, right now I'm plowing through a bunch of books on, manhood, Christian, the Bible and manhood, because I'm getting ready to teach on that subject a lot this next year. But you've got to have a plan. So that's kind of how I do it. And then if I could go past that,
let's go.
Another thing that I like to do in response to, and kind of like, I don't know if it's planning or not, but once I finish a book, I just put it on my list of books that I've read for that year. So I have like a 2021 reading list. And so I'll put that book on the list. I'll give it a short, like 1-sentence review. And then I always rate it 1 to 5, 5 being the best, because people ask me for book recommendations and stuff. So I like to just, be able to search for all my 5s. I don't want to give them a 3 or a 1. So I just search for all my 5s and I'll skim through it and go, oh yeah, I think you might like this book. You might like that book. This would be appropriate for you. Helps at Christmas time when I buy books for my friends or family.
Oh yeah.
Like, here's some good books that I like. So I like to just keep that catalog of where I've been. And if I'm really feeling planny, then I'll actually go and copy all the highlights that I took as I read through that book, just different things that I highlighted, because since I read digital books, I don't read hard copies. So I'll take all the highlights and I'll paste them into that note so that I can, search for them, reference, just read the highlights of that book in the future.
Dang, that's a tight way to do it. I can never get down with the digital reading experience for some reason.
Yeah.
I've tried it. I don't know. I gotta give it another go because that sounds so tight.
Yeah,
but
I know a lot of people love that page.
I know
in
there's
their
something
hand.
about it,
and it's powerful because it cuts down on distractions. You can't push a button on the page and go anywhere else. But I love digital reading because I can look up words real quickly.
Huge.
The dictionary is just embedded into it, and some of the stuff I'm reading, these guys are way smarter than I am, so I don't know the words they're using a lot of times. So I need to look them up. And then because of the being able to catalog those highlights in the future, and then it's a whole other subject, but I'm really big into libraries, and so
that's right.
Yeah, I have in California, I think I have 25 library cards, just because in California, wherever I go, I'll just go to the local library and get a new library card. It's the
greatest flex ever.
So that means I can check out books from these places digitally and borrow them. The highlights I get to keep forever. The books you don't get to keep forever. Obviously, you're just checking them out. So it just the pros and cons, it was the benefit far outweighed the cost of
100%
reading digitally for me. So I just kind of went all in on that.
So
Plus
tight.
My whole theological library is digital because I use the Logos study software. So if I'm buying commentary kind of books, that's a whole other subject of reading for me. Then that's that goes into that digital platform. That's
totally
different subject.
Dude, I love that. I think that one thing you're mentioning is about the importance of reading is that sometimes books can take you somewhere that you don't have to go. They can kind of prevent you from pain and making the wrong step and everything. I found that some books can really be like a mentor. And that's so important about reading, that you can get into the mind of somebody that you respect, admire, and just get to know them in a certain kind of way. And I've also loved, I think that you've talked about this before, but stacking reading. I'll stack a fun book or kind of secondary theology book with my Bible reading. And that's been huge for me, in the mornings, because I usually read in the morning. I'll wake up and get my coffee, read, and I'll read a fun book first and then get into my Bible and do my journaling and my whole rhythm. But that stacking has been fun. It'd be able to begin your morning with a mentor, somebody you respect, and then jump into God's word and learn about Jesus. I'm dude, this is such a rich way to start off the day. Do you read in the mornings, or what do you normally do?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I read beyond just in the mornings, but it's kind of the way I got started with that, honestly, was just to say, okay, I want to have a goal of reading 10 pages of
love that.
Some kind of either devotional or theological, some kind of biblical based book. I want to read 10 pages of it with my morning devotional time. And maybe for someone that's listening, you just say I just want to commit to reading 5 pages.
Right.
But that's a great way to get yourself rolling, is just to have a modest goal And what ends up happening is that little habit turns into, there's a whole book about this called Atomic Habits. That little habit turns into something bigger. And you start realizing like, oh, I could read more than 5 pages.
Totally.
And pretty soon you find yourself reading a whole chapter or 2 chapters, and it just becomes more of a rhythm in your life. But I'm glad you brought up what you did just about the books kind of being able to serve as like mentors and help, for you as you're going through life and ministry. Because that's really why I put it in the article.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about, what has helped me serve Jesus so far in one place. And I think a lot of it has been that I've been interacting with mentors and teachers and theologians and leading thinkers by the written word this whole time. So I haven't had to always go to them. They've come to me, and I'm able to like keep myself fresh and mentally stimulated and strong.
Yeah.
And that's just such a huge gift. So that's a major part of like why I said reading.
Yeah.
I put it first on the list. It's not like it's the number one thing.
I know. Yeah.
But it was just the first thing that came to my mind.
Totally. And I don't mean to belabor the reading part. I know there's a lot more to talk about, but could you give us...
this is a podcast, so people are
I guess it's true.
I'm listening to a podcast because I don't like reading books.
Yeah, we're talking about the thing you don't want to do, really. Yeah. I am curious, though, just last thing about it. Do you have any authors that you recommend to somebody who's trying to get started with reading? I imagine people like want to go the distance with their faith, but like, I don't know who to read.
Yeah, no, I don't. And the reason I say that is because I really don't like giving recommendations carte blanche, like without knowing who I'm talking to. I like asking a couple of follow-up questions, of what they're going through, what their background is, and then I can kind of pull out and figure out some people. But I think a great website that with a lot of material that I really trust would be the Gospel Coalition website.
For sure.
That's a great place to go, and you can kind of get yourself started with seeing some different authors. There's a lot of higher theology kind of works that are there. So if you're newer to the faith, there might be some things that are a little too advanced for you. But there's a lot of thinkers there, and you can kind of get yourself into that world a little bit, and then you'll start seeing other authors that are recommended, from those authors and stuff like that. But that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Thanks for talking about reading for a minute.
Sure.
Let's go on to another thing, relationships. I loved your thoughts about your friendships, your home relationships. And I know that for a lot of people, relationships are just difficult. It's like kind of depending on your age. I've read a lot of memes that talk about, being in your 30s, and it's like, it's hard to find friends. They'll be like, how do you even find friends when you're in your 30s? You're not going to school with anybody anymore. You kind of started your career. You're tired a lot because you're working or whatever it might be, and it's like, okay, who are going to be like my people that I go through life with? But I know that you have some cool friendships that you've had for quite a while too. And I was curious from you how those friendships began. Were those friendships that birthed out of church relationships? Did you pursue a few people that you admired? How did that just work for you? And I'm only asking because sometimes I talk to people, and I've felt this way too. I don't know where to look for a friend. Or you try to like join me like a small group, and you're like, okay, this is gonna be my opportunity to find a friend. And you just kind of don't connect with somebody there, and maybe you feel a little standoffish because of that. So I'm just curious, like, how did you find the people that you chose to pour into?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing for me is if you can lower the expectation of how many quality friends you think you need to have to thrive in life, I think that's beneficial and helpful.
Yeah.
I know we all make our jokes about like how many friends I have on social media and, you know, all of that. And we all understand that these aren't really our true friends. But I do think there's this low key thing that happens when we're swimming in that world where we begin thinking like, well, I know I don't really have 1,000 friends, but I should have like 50. And no, you won't. You won't have 50 real friends. To lower it down to say, you know, if I just had, you know, 2 or 3 people that I had that level of connection with, I could get through a lot. And I'll have other people that I'm, you know, associating with, that I'm friendly with, that I definitely love spending time with them and all of that. But really, I don't need to have this massive amount of the tightest level of friendship that you can have. That's just really not possible. A second thing that I would say is this is hard for everybody, I think, across the board.
Yeah.
And like you said, you know, you get into your 30s, and I think especially when you start having children, if you're married and you're having kids, you know, it's like, then there's just all these levels, you know, like when you were single, Riley, all of that required was that you connected strongly with the guy. But then you got married, and it's kind of like, well, does Chesley like the wife, you know? And then kids come into the equation, and it's like, well, our kids aren't really the same age, or their kid, like, you know, picks their nose and wipes it on our kid, or like, you know, you just like get these things where it's so complicated for it to be a connection, and it feels almost impossible. So again, I think in some ways you got to kind of like let your, lower your expectations, you know, of that it's got to be a match across the board. And then I think another thing I'd say is, this is hard for everybody, but I think in the church, we are well positioned to be able to overcome this particular issue because I get to meet people that are fascinating and exciting to be with all the time, partly because I like serving Jesus. So when I'm interacting with someone else who's serving Jesus and they're about the kingdom, I'm like, okay, you're my kind of person.
Connection.
And the thing about that is without a friendship being based on a kingdom orientation, if friendship is not about that, then you got to be really choosy. You got to be really, really choosy, because it's going to come down to like personality or an overlap of interests or similar perspectives on non-crucial things. But when it comes down to, is this person a kingdom person or not, then a lot of those other things, they really become secondary, and you're able to say, I really enjoy being with this person. We're dissimilar in lots of different ways, but they're a kingdom person. And so for me, that's been a huge one over the years, you know, in the church, is just realizing like, well, you know, I mean, I got a buddy right now, like we couldn't really be more different from each other in so many ways. And our personalities are different, our interests are different. Although I am kind of getting him into weightlifting right now. But the reality is we're kingdom guys, you know, like that's what we want more than anything, is to see his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we have so much to talk about, to fellowship about, and it's been fun for me to like get to know what he's about, even though he's very different from me in a lot of ways. So that's been really helpful. But yeah, I think, you know, in some of the relationships I'm in, I mean, that they're a direct result of being in one place for a really long time.
Yeah, it's
you know,
true,
honestly,
huh? Yeah.
you know, you just over long periods of time in one place, there's just relationships that develop. And I know some people are bridge burners, you know, so they're in one place and they've just cut off all ties with everybody because it's just, you know, scorched earth policy or whatever. But that hasn't been the case for me. And there's just been some good relationships that, you know, they've ebbed and flowed and gone through peaks and valleys like any friendship or relationship would. But because I've been here for a long time. There's just people that have also been here for a long time, and we just enjoy each other, Seinfeld has this funny bit in his recent thing that he came out with on Netflix where he talks about, it's just like this whole bit about friends, and he's just like, his whole thing is just like, basically like, you can't find any better friends than the people you already got, and he just kind of like is like, the conclusion at the end of the day is, I might as well just roll with these fools. We're just trying to get through it together.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
That's
but for me, like, I mean, the most significant, I mentioned relationships,
right,
and I'm talking about friendships. But I think the relationships that have really helped me endure here, it definitely have been friendships, but my relationship with my wife and kids, and then my relationship with my fellow pastors, I really honestly feel like if things are clicking with Christina, and if things are clicking with my co-laborers, our elder team, I can kind of get through anything, and then if I have the added bonus of some solid friendships as well that provide a place of refuge,
some laughs,
then I can really endure. And that's that, like you said, laughs, that's exactly what, we're talking about endurance, being in one place for a really long time. It's not always going to be encouraging to be in the same place. There's a reason why a lot of people hop around. There's a reason why people are skipping out of California right now. Discouraging things happen for people. And if you can't have friendships that you just go and just laugh, get distracted with, some of the best friends I've had over the years are just so like, they don't even understand how the church works internally. They don't get it. So they don't even know really the right questions to ask me at times, and it's just like fine for me because it's fun to just relax. I'm happy to talk about the things of the Lord with them. They're believers. They're about Jesus. They're kingdom people. But when it comes to like the nitty gritty of like, everyday pastoral life or whatever, that's just not their experience. So there's a gap there in our understanding, and it's great because it almost just forces us to just have fun, talk about other stuff, and that can be really helpful if you want to make it someplace for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you resonate with this, but I've found that being in the same place for a long time, people come and go, and I've been in certain stages of my life where I've been discouraged because people will go.
Yeah.
You'll make some great friendships, people will leave, and you feel like you've been deserted. But I don't know who told this to me, or I don't know how this happened, but I feel like I began to have the conviction that I have to go make friends all the time. Like, I have to be the one who is continually initiating. I need to find people. I need to be building. I can't just wait for people to come to me. And that might sound like discouraging to some, like, nobody's coming for you. But it's kind of like, well, you read Philippians, you read about this kind of like selfless humility, and you're continually pursuing reconciliation, and you're wrestling with each other to come to agreement with each other. And it's just like, there is this thing about the Christian faith where we go, we find people. And I found that to be really helpful for me because, when you're in one place, like you said, people just do go. And to have it in your mind, like, hey, I'm going to continually pour into friendships, has just been like a really great mental place to be in. Do you feel like that's kind of right on with how you think about friendships?
That's so good. I love hearing you talk about that. It's like, Jesus was incarnational.
Yeah,
He incarnated 100%. To pursue people. It's almost like I'm hearing that phrase from Jesus, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. I'm hearing that phrase from Jesus, and it's like maybe an application of that is follow me and I'll make you a fisher of friends. Like you're going to have to be, that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to be fishing for, pursuing intentionally those connections and relationships. And it's definitely true. I mean, we live in a place here in Monterey, California that is pretty transient, especially for younger people. It's a tough place to be able to afford to live for a long period of time. So people, it's like a gap or a season of their lives that they'll live here, and then they move on to cheaper pastures. But the reality is that's just kind of the way everywhere is now.
Yeah.
It's pretty rare for someone to live a long place in one time.
Yeah.
In one place for a long time. So, you just have to be kind of always about the habit of building those relationships and connections.
It's so true, man. Hey, I wanted to ask you about one more thing, and I know we only talked about a couple of things here, but there's so much in this article. I did want to kind of skim down to the bottom of the list a little bit and talk about aiming to see Christ formed in everyone you serve. I thought that was such an interesting point that you put in there in order to go the distance in one place, because I feel like sometimes we can hear something like this where it's not me focused, it's other people focused, and we can kind of get to this place where we don't feel like we're ready to do that yet, and or maybe I don't know how to do it, or I need to be built up before I can do something like that. This doesn't seem like something to keep you serving for a long time. It seems like, okay, after you feel secure, then this is like the next thing you can do. But the way you're talking about it here, it's really special because it sounds like it actually brings you life. It brings you a bit of purpose. That discipleship to the people you serve has actually refreshed you to some degree. Can you kind of talk about that? Like, how did that birth in your heart? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think where it comes from is when you're serving Jesus in one place for a long time, you are interacting with the same people.
True.
For a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're serving Jesus in a high school ministry, for example, you get this blessing of fresh faces every year. And every 4 years, you got a whole new group of people that you're ministering to. So it feels naturally like a fresh challenge every single year because there's new individuals to pour into. Now, I know that even in that kind of setting, you can get that feeling like I'm in a rut. This is the same thing over and over again. Different faces, same issues, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But when you're doing, at least what I'm doing, a lot of the people that I'm ministering to and that we're, doing the Christian life together, we're forming a church community together, we're living out the faith together, we're loving one another, serving one another. There's definitely always new people in that, but there's a lot of folks that I've known for decades now.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that that's only going to continue as time goes by. And I mean, you think about your own life. I mean, if we're all honest, there's areas in our own lives that we're just so you just wish you could change about yourself, something about your nature or inclinations or drives or whatever that you're trying to grow in, but it just seems like it's such slow going. You have that experience internally. So I say that just to try to say, I'm not trying to be mean with the idea that you're ministering to someone for a long, long period of time. There's bound to be moments where it just kind of feels like this is the same issue that we were dealing with 20 years ago, man.
Totally.
That's just going to happen. And you can kind of, I think when you're in one place, a person can kind of feel like the challenge is over with, like they've done as much as they can do or whatever. But the reason I put this one in here, aim to see Christ formed in everyone you serve, is that job is never done. You could be ministering to the same person for 50 years and Christ being formed in them at age 20, it looks different than at age 70. And so as they're going through their journey, each step of the way, if the aim is, like Paul said, I want to see Christ formed in you, then there's a fresh challenge. It's not like, well, I ministered to you when you're 20. Now I'm ministering to you when you're 30. Now I'm ministering to you while you're 40 or 50 or 60. It's, hey, you've never been this age before. And what would it look like for Christ to be formed in you today? The issues you're facing, the trials you're facing, the stuff you're going through, When a guy is 21 years old and I'm ministering to him, he's usually not really stressed out about his mortgage or taxes, or that the IRS is going to come audit his business, or that his kid is struggling with autism, or that his wife is going through changes that are stressing him out. Like, these aren't things that he's dealing with at that stage of life. So I want to see Christ formed in him when he's 21, but I also want to see Christ formed in him when he's in his mid 40s. And I want to see Christ formed in him when he's collecting his Social Security. I want to see Christ formed in him at whatever stage of life he's in. And I think that bar is so high, and I don't mean to say that in this like legalistic, condemning, like we're just so crappy, kind of, thing, but just there's always more, right? There's always more that Jesus can do in a person's life. And so to have that, I think, is really helpful. And then I think it just helps when those discouraging moments come where you're feeling like you're not getting through with a person, and that change is not happening. To hold that out there, Paul called it a hope. He believed in the new covenant so much that he had a hope for what could happen in a person's life. So holding out that hope of Christ being formed in them, it can help you, endure.
Amen.
So I think I was just thinking about it mostly, though, from the standpoint of when it feels like there's no challenge, you're wrong. There's a huge challenge, Christ being formed in the people that you're serving.
It's so true. That reminds me of just what Paul said, in his letters. He would identify as a servant. Paul, a servant of Christ. He found his purpose in his service. And there was just something that always motivated him to continue writing, continue discipling, continue pastoring, continue living life, even with hard people and through hard situations. There's always something else that God wanted to produce inside those people that he was with. And Jesus saw the same thing in his disciples and his followers. It's like, man, we can kind of grab a hold of that heart, that thing that can keep us moving day in, day out, get us out of bed in the morning, So I think that's a beautiful point to put in here. There's so much purpose in that. I feel like that one even combats kind of like some of the other things that you were talking about here about the need to control everything. You said, let things get messy. You talked about not chasing the numbers, like choosing quality over quantity, having a loose grip on things, take breaks, be steady, all these different things. There's just such good stuff in here. And again, for those of you listening or watching on YouTube, we'll put a link in the show notes in the description box for you to be able to view this article. But before we go, Nate, I just wanted to give you a chance. I'm sure there's people who are listening right now who are just feeling really tired in ministry or in life. They're just discouraged. Maybe some people don't even want to continue going on. I feel like I've heard that just so many times from people that they don't want to keep going, not in a way where they want to take their own life or anything like that, but just are just so exhausted, just feeling burnt out from the life they're living, the social media feeds they're giving themselves into, relational discomforts, whatever it might be. But do you have anything that you want to just share with people just to encourage them just to keep going, to continue showing up, to continue believing that God does have a plan and a purpose for their lives and the people in their sphere of influence? Do you have anything you want to just say to them before we wrap up?
Absolutely. Your question makes me think of Revelation chapter 2, when Jesus began through John communicating 7 letters for the 7 churches in Asia Minor that were there at that time. And the church in Ephesus, they were about it. They were toiling, working, serving. They were trying to serve Jesus for a long time, and they were theologically sound. They were for the right things, and they borne a lot of fruit in their lives. But the love they had at the first, that's what Jesus had against them, had been abandoned. They'd abandoned the love they had at the first. And Jesus he wanted them to return to that marital passion for him. And I know that there are times where people struggle with their relationship with God, and they, we question, why is God doing this or that? Why has he allowed this or that into my life? But I think in our heart of hearts, at the core of who we are, we know through the gospel that Christ does not disappoint in any way. And if we could rekindle that first love afresh, it might lead us into having a restored vigor for serving Jesus, but it might lead us to saying, I need to take some time to just sit at the feet of Jesus and get refreshed and restored in him for a while. But you cannot detach serving Jesus from your personal love for Jesus. So my encouragement, to someone who's really, struggling, and I think, the last couple of years have been really hard for ministers of the gospel. There have been so many things that people have felt are primary that I think when you look into the word, they're just not primary, but they've had a primary feeling and tone and anger about them. And it's been hard, it's been challenging for a lot of gospel workers, to endure, because you feel like you want to be about Jesus, you want to be about the word, but there's just these discouraging elements and factions that are present, and it can be a distraction. It can be hard to know what to do. You can, feel bummed out. But for, people in that situation, I just really encourage you to return to your first love. I was reading a J.I. Packer book recently where he talked about his call into ministry. And at the point that he was writing this book, it was an event that had happened 50 years earlier. And he said that the little chapel service at his school that he was in at that time as a young man, this, I forget even what denomination he had come from, but this clergyman came and was speaking, and Packer just really wasn't expecting very much from this guy, because I think he'd come from a different denomination or something, and there he was in his clerical robes getting ready to give this speech to the student body. But Packer said that there was a moment where this man just said, I came to Christ, and I was 18 years old, and this is what happened to me. It was a radical moment. And then what happened to me is God gave me a love for his church. I became infatuated with his church. I grew to be enamored with the church. And that just so resonated with Packer, and it kind of launched him into like choosing that ministry life, or at least that's the way he framed it in this book. And, for people who are serving Jesus, a lot of times that's happened to you at some point in your life. You became enamored with the church. You're like, Jesus, you're brilliant.
Yeah.
You're brilliant. As I know people have all kinds of issues with the church or whatever, but for a lot of us, we just feel like this is the coolest invention ever. It's such a grace operation.
Totally.
It's so weak and humble, and it has to be dependent on the Lord. It's this new community, this new humanity. It's the coolest invention ever. And it's only possible because of Jesus.
Amen.
So we've fallen in love with this thing that Jesus made, but you just can't have a true love for the church without cultivating, protecting, establishing, prioritizing your love for Jesus, the inventor of the church. So whatever you got to do to get back to that first love, do it. And prioritize those things. And if you don't have time to keep that central in your life, then you're not going to make it. So find a way to make sure there is the time, because otherwise you're bound to burn out.
We pray that today's discussion has blessed you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share so we can continue to reach people and make Jesus famous in our lives and the lives around us. Until next time, God bless.